In 2017, a cybersecurity firm called Darktrace reported a hack at a Vegas casino. The casino had state-of-the-art cybersecurity. We're talking antivirus software, firewalls, the works. But when hackers want to find a way in, they can be very resourceful. This casino had one very unique feature, a fish tank. One that could be remotely controlled over the internet to check on water temperature and salinity, and even automate fish feedings over Wi-Fi. The hackers broke into the network through the tank's thermometer, and from there, they made their way to the casino's high roller network, some of the most sensitive data a casino holds. The theft was over in minutes. No masks, no break-ins, just 1 week password.
As we've rolled out the internet globally, there are thousands of cables connecting all the continents, and there are new cables being laid down every single day. And if you can visualize it, you can just see the data zipping between continents. That enables us to communicate with friends and family, business partners all over the world. But it also allows anyone with a computer or even just a cell phone anywhere on the world to reach out and touch you.
Americans have this idea that we still live on an island protected by 2 vast oceans. And the reality is that on the internet, those oceans don't exist. Hackers are milliseconds away, and unfortunately, in too many cases, they're already inside our most critical systems, waiting for a rainy day. Sleeper cells.
It feels like it's a world away, and that I'm not a part of this. But what we're finding is that every day, more and more aspects of our lives are being targeted by the bad guys.
You have to think about every smart device in your home as a potential entry point for hackers into those systems, into your most personal life.
When our phones or our home networks can be used as platforms to attack businesses or even our nation in cyberspace, we have a responsibility to secure them better.
In this class, you'll learn how to develop your own personal threat model, how to protect yourself, given that new understanding. And lastly, you'll come away with an understanding that all aspects of global conflict begin in the digital space.
I'm Paul M. Nakasone. I led both the National Security Agency and U.S. Cyber Command through a global pandemic, through 3 national elections, and through increasing challenges to our critical infrastructure and key resources.
I'm Nicole Perlroth. I spent over a decade writing about cyber threats for the New York Times. I wrote the book, This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends, an investigation of the cyber arms race. I've advised government agencies about cybersecurity, and these days I travel the world educating everyday people about the current threat landscape.
I was the first director of the United States Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, also known as CISA. We make sure that when you wake up in the morning, the water comes out of the tap, the lights come on, and that when you check your bank account, your money's there. I'm Chris Krebs, and this is Cyber Warfare on Masterclass. In 2007, I looked at the world around us and how everything was increasingly digital. I mean, think about when the first iPhone came out, right? It was clear to me at that point that everything was going online. Everything was connected. And yet we didn't have the mechanisms. We didn't have the frameworks and the structures to protect ourselves from what were obviously going to be a number of increasing threats coming through that digital angle.
When we take a look at cyber operations, really think of it in a spectrum of beginning with espionage. Nations use cyber operations to steal other nations' secrets. From there, it moved on to how do we use cyber operations to steal intellectual property? And from there, identity theft being able to understand the people of a nation and from their information operations. How do you use cyber operations to influence a broad mass of people? And finally, how does cyber operations come into being able to be used against your critical infrastructure and key resources? The challenge to operating in cyberspace, it's not just the fact that nation states operate there, it's also the fact that individuals can operate there as well.
We have this Hollywood perception of hackers. They're always in hoodies. They're always in this dark room in their parents' basement, and they're hacking us for whatever reason. I think what you need to understand is that now it's at a whole nother level of sophistication.
The thing about hacking is that it's been corporatized. All around the world, there are people whose job it is to hack you, your bank, your government. They could be working in an unmarked office building in Beijing and Tehran and Pyongyang, Moscow. Just like you and me, every morning the alarm goes off, they get dressed, and they go to work. They're just piling in. They're sitting down at a desk and they're hacking away 9 to 5. According to the FBI, the Chinese may have upwards of 500,000 cyber operators.
The Chinese government has a bigger hacking program than that of every major nation combined. They also work with cyber criminals, which is then a whole force multiplier to that already significant enterprise.
We have collapsed geographic distances from bad guys on the other side of the world. They can now reach out and touch us. We're sleeping, they're at their keyboards, hacking away, trying to understand who we are, what we do, how to get to our money, how to get sensitive information, and they want to exploit it for their own purposes.
It's become a business to the tune of almost $1 billion for the North Koreans and untold hundreds of millions of dollars for Russians that have been able to do this out of their country to impact our economy.
They're in there every single day, dedicated to hacking into the critical software and services that we rely on, whether we know it or not. And their job is to break in and then ultimately get to you.
We might have the most advanced military in the world. We might have nukes. Where we are uniquely vulnerable is in the fact that we are one of the most digitally dependent nations on Earth. We're just more digitally dependent than Russia is, and North Korea is, and China is. We have decided that we're willing to make great sacrifices on security in the name of convenience, in the name of efficiency. So we have adopted technology at a higher rate than they have. We've moved towards automation and now artificial intelligence at a quicker rate. And all of that means that we just have a bigger attack surface.
Think about where you were 5 years ago. Think how many connected devices you had in your house, in your car, at work, on your body. Everybody's got a watch now that's connected, or an Oura Ring. 5 years ago, we didn't have all those things. Life was simpler. You didn't have so much digital exhaust. And then put yourself 5 years in the future. How many more things are going to be connected? Your dishwasher, we're already there. Your car is going to be getting daily over-the-air updates. Your dog's going to have a collar on it that's measuring the health of the animal. You may even have a human computer interface. These things are not science fiction. This is reality. This is happening today in laboratories around the world. Every aspect of our life has some element of connectivity that, yes, allows for a better experience, a better life, allows us to take better care of ourselves and our families, But there's a darker side here as well. Where we see opportunity, so do bad guys. In 2017, I was at the Department of Homeland Security, and all of a sudden, one morning I wake up and I open up my favorite social media app at the time, used to be known as Twitter, and I see that there are these reports of all these companies around the world that have been knocked offline. In an office like this, you could stand on one side of the office and just see the screens go blue, 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 blue. And as the day wore on, we saw this spreading west into the US, Asia. The Russian military had infected an accounting software in Ukraine. And that any company that wanted to do business in Ukraine had to use this specific software. But the Russians had put malware, destructive code that was then embedded into all of these companies. The takeaway from this attack was that cyber is a tool that state actors, the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, the North Koreans, can use to punish their enemies. And not just countries, but business interests that decide to do business with their enemies. This sort of destructive attack that we saw in 2017 was a prelude. Every battle from here on out will start with the digital attack. You might think, how does a Russian cyber attack, a Russian invasion of Ukraine have anything to do with me? I think it's hard to understand how you as an individual, how I as an individual can get wrapped up into all this, right? Think back to the summer of 2021. You might have been on the East Coast, getting ready to enjoy a nice long holiday weekend. But you got to fill up the tank in the car first, right? So you roll up to the gas station. For some reason, the tanks are empty. There's no gas. Why? Russian cyber criminals launched an attack on a company known as Colonial Pipeline.
A Russian criminal organization called DarkSide was able to actually steal the password of a user on the Colonial Pipeline network. How did they do this? We think they bought it off the dark web. Few of us knew that Colonial Pipeline even existed. Yet it had 43% of the fuel running through their pipelines to a number of different gas stations up and down the East Coast. Once ransomware was applied to the billing and the business portions of this network, Colonial Pipeline shut the entire network down.
That stopped the movement of refined product of gasoline along the East Coast. And it also set off panic buying because it wasn't clear how quickly Colonial was going to get back up.
For a period of 3 to 4 days, long lines appeared at the gas station.
At the time, I was a reporter at the New York Times, and we actually got our hands on a confidential Department of Energy assessment that found that as a country, we could have only afforded 3 or 4 more days of downtime before the US economy fell to its knees. And it wasn't so much the gas or the jet fuel. We had the reserves for that. It was the diesel required to run our factories. It exposed all of these dependencies that we just didn't realize we had, these sort of single points of failure. And our adversaries paid very close attention to that.
A simple ransomware attack based upon poor cyber hygiene is able to cause chaos and panic on the eastern seaboard of the United States. This is the new reality of operating within the domain of cyberspace. When you think about a ransomware attack, All of them begin the same way. It's getting access to the network. You'd think, well, that's really difficult, but it isn't very difficult. The fact that every single day, passwords are stolen, passwords are misused, passwords are being able to be guarded by criminals allows them the initial point of access. And once they understand the networks, they put down malware. Think about that. Malware on your network. No longer can you get at your data. No longer can you operate your network. Once malware is deployed on a network to impact your data or impact your network, then you have a very, very difficult decision to make as the ransomware note comes up and says, you owe us this amount of money to be able to get the keys to unlock the ransomware that is impacting your network. And many organizations have to have a very, very difficult decision. Do they pay it or do they try to rebuild their network? Colonial Pipeline spent $4.4 million in Bitcoin to be able to be released from that ransomware.
When I first started covering ransomware attacks at the New York Times back in 2012, it was individuals who were getting their personal computers held hostage. Usually they would see something like a fake message from the FBI. And usually it would say something like, we know you've been visiting illegal sites, like pornography sites. Pay us, $200 with a gift card. Give us the gift card PIN and you'll have access back to your computer. It was one group that was developing the code, developing the ransomware code, holding you hostage, doing the negotiation with you over how much you were going to pay, and then decrypting your data. Then a couple things changed, namely cryptocurrency. So suddenly they could say, pay us $1 million in Bitcoin. So we saw this proliferate. And with that proliferation, we saw these ransomware groups not come for individuals anymore, right? That's the low-hanging fruit, but come for entire enterprises.
15 years ago, $100, a couple $1,000. Today, it's big business. I've heard of ransom payments, demands, $40 million. This is a global criminal ecosystem that could exceed $1 trillion in the next couple years.
Now we look at something called ransomware as a service. One group makes the code, another group handles the implantation or the breaking in, another group handles the negotiations. All of that means that you don't actually need to have any technical know-how whatsoever to use ransomware to lock up a system. It's a really well-oiled economy in and of itself. And they were going to the targets that had the most urgency to get access to their data back.
Ransomware attacks affect everyone. It's not just large corporations. It's also the rural hospitals. It's also the individuals. It's the schools. It's the cities. Ransomware has a disproportionate impact on people that have the least amount of money to pay it. The number one sector in the United States for ransomware attacks is the healthcare industry. There are 2,000 rural hospitals in the United States today. They are not the highest security networks. Think about the hospital that then has to decide, what do we do if we can't touch our patient's data? Or what do we do if we can't order an MRI? Or what do we do if we can't be able to look at a patient's medical history? That presents a really difficult choice for that hospital. Do they pay the ransomware or do they try to rebuild their network?
In 2020, the cyber criminal group hacked this hospital in Vermont. And when we went to this hospital and we interviewed nurses that worked there, they said, we're turning away patients. Patients can't get critical care. We're shutting down procedures. They didn't know, what they were allergic to. They didn't know what their medical histories were. In a lot of cases, the devices that are now used for a lot of these procedures are now smart devices. This is the level of impact this one ransomware attack had. Some of them had actually previously worked in Boston. The only thing they could compare it to was working the burn unit after the Boston Marathon bombing. And they said, why is no one paying attention to what's happening at our hospital?
There's no question in my mind that people have died as a result of ransomware, that hospitals have been hit in critical care, surgeries, childbirth has been disrupted as a result. And yes, while this is a tool right now of geopolitical power, where the Kremlin, where the Russians are using ransomware to disrupt the West, to cause panic and chaos, in the future, we will see more of this with an intent where people will die. Ransomware is a tool of geopolitical power. Cyber attacks are not just about technical attacks on networks, technical attacks on devices. They're increasingly about societal and civil unrest, chaos, getting us to panic, to pressure our governments. So you're directly affected by these geopolitical forces, directly affected by cyber warfare. The Russians have harnessed a number of different groups inside their borders. They've even given them a bit of a license to hunt globally, just as long as they don't hit Russian systems. Their law enforcement, their security services can turn a blind eye, just as long as they're causing chaos elsewhere.
Russia and China have vast numbers of hackers to tap into and do their dirty work. China has basically forced hackers to do its dirty work after hours. So some of the really sophisticated attacks that we see, they come from this sort of loose satellite network of contractors that operate on the state's behalf. So they're tapped for some of the most sensitive operations, to hack our telecommunication networks, to hack defense contractors, in some cases to hack critical infrastructure. I like to say that ransomware is pen testing the United States. And what I mean by that is I think cyber criminals are showing us where we're vulnerable. And those vulnerabilities are exploited on a much quieter basis by advanced nation states like China. And so you really have to worry about both. Now, the cyber criminals are louder, right? They're freezing up your data. They're trying to extort you for money. You're learning that your identity is stolen. But all of those same vulnerabilities are also being actively exploited by advanced nation state hackers.
This is what we learned from Colonial Pipeline, that there was a level of cybersecurity that companies had to be able to meet, that you had to have multi-factor authentication, that you had to have vigilance in defending your network, that you had to have a resiliency that prevented a simple criminal from conducting a ransomware attack that impacted a broad swath of America. A simple password with no multi-factor authentication allowed a criminal to get into an organization that controls 43% of the fuel on the East Coast. When we look at cyberspace and defending our nation in cyberspace, the individual has a responsibility as well. Being able to ensure that your own phone or your own home network is not being used as a platform for hackers or different elements to attack a different business or country is one of the things that we've got to take very seriously. Strong passwords matter. Strong passwords, not password 1234, but actually a password that has multiple different characters and capital letters and numbers within it.
Don't recycle your passwords, right? Every time you use a password for Gap.com or Target or whatever it is, these companies get breached. It happens every single day. Once they get the password from that one account, they're going to spray it across every other account that Americans use. And they're going to get in if you're recycling passwords.
On average, every individual utilizes about 20 different passwords on a daily basis. Being able to remember 20 different unique passwords is incredibly challenging. Utilizing a password manager ensures strong, unique passwords for these.
Think about a password manager as a secure digital safe that stores all your logins. You really only need one strong master password and it remembers the rest. So why is that important? First, it stops password reuse. It creates strong, unique passwords for each account, and it protects all the rest of your accounts if one account gets hacked. Multi-factor authentication, it sounds technical. It sounds maybe something that I don't understand. All it really means is beyond a password, you have something else unique to you that no one else in the world has. That could be a phone number. That could be an email. Increasingly, we're seeing authenticator apps provided by recognizable, reputable brands like Google, like Microsoft, that give you that opportunity through an app on your phone to generate a unique key, a unique code every time you want to log in. Or maybe it's every couple weeks. So for your really sensitive accounts, bank accounts, health records, I always encourage people to use multi-factor authentication.
It really starts with doing these basic things around cyber hygiene, and they can feel really boring and really redundant and really just, you can't believe that you turning on multi-factor authentication might be the difference between the nation's biggest pipeline being shut down or not. But that is the reality. In each of these huge cases, it comes down to someone not updating to the latest version of the software, one person in the organization not using multi-factor authentication, one person recycling a username and password. So it only takes one, and you're the one. The way that we rise above this challenge, the way we address this threat, is that each one of us comes back and does these very basic things to harden our attack surface, or these very basic things to make us harder targets for hackers.
And so it comes back to this idea. You don't have to be the fastest gazelle in the forest. You just can't be the slowest.
One Friday before Thanksgiving in 2023, Nick Lawler, the general manager of Littleton's Electric, Light, and Water Department in Littleton, Massachusetts, which is a town of about 10,000 people, gets a call from someone claiming to be the FBI. And this FBI agent tells him that they need to email Nick a link to click on in order to check whether his utility has been compromised by hackers. And he's thinking, yeah, right. So he actually hangs up on the guy. And then he Googles this guy's name. So he calls the FBI local field office. The guy picks up the phone and he starts explaining to him that he believes that he's been compromised by hackers and that he needs to confirm as much. So Nick tells him, if you're serious about this, then I'll see you at 10 a.m. Monday morning. So 10 a.m. Monday morning rolls around and someone in the office comes and says, there's two gentlemen here to see you. He goes out and there's two gentlemen there from government, both in suits, one from the FBI, one from CISA, which is the Cyber Defense Agency. And they say, we're here because we believe that you're one of 200 other utility operations that have been compromised by a group called Volt Typhoon.
Volt Typhoon is a name that we give to Chinese hackers, particularly those from the Ministry of State Security, that have been able to focus in and penetrate our critical infrastructure and key resources in cyberspace.
Salt Typhoon is a separate group of Chinese state hackers that operates at the behest of China's Ministry of State Security. Essentially, they're NSA. And they're one of the most sophisticated espionage actors that the US is up against today. They've gained deep access to American internet service providers and telecommunication networks. But it's Volt Typhoon that presents the more immediate threat.
China has a broad-based cyber strategy, but one of the things that we've noticed really since 2020 is that they are focusing very, very hard on our critical infrastructure and key resources. In the United States, we classified 16 different sectors of critical infrastructure, whether or not that's financial, or water, or aviation, or transportation. These are the sectors of critical infrastructure that really make our economy go.
These are all targets that have been hit by these advanced Chinese hacking groups called Volt Typhoon and Salt Typhoon. And the thinking is that they want to be pre-positioned to have the optionality to shut these systems down in either the everything, everywhere, all at once cyber attack scenario, or maybe it's a strategic hit on Colonial Pipeline or a Colonial Pipeline equivalent, something that would prevent us from just getting America's lifeblood, gas, for more than 3 days. When I first started covering cybersecurity at the New York Times, the biggest threat that we faced was identity theft, financial fraud, and then increasingly intellectual property theft. Most of it was by groups in China who were taking that IP, taking that intellectual property, copying it, releasing it into global markets. Now we started seeing these really disturbing attacks on critical infrastructure and all the technology that these systems rely on. And some of these targets had no IP theft value whatsoever. They're embedding in these systems for a rainy day. We call that pre-positioning. They're not turning off systems just yet, but they're getting access and then doing nothing but lying in wait. Literally like sleeper cells waiting for future instructions.
There's no intelligence in being able to be within the water sector, but actually allow them to have a presence and lay in wait in case they ever want to create havoc at a time and place of their choosing and during periods of increased tension between the United States and the People's Republic.
Now, the theories as to why they're there are endless, but the primary theory is that if China were to invade Taiwan, and if they were to assume that the United States would come to Taiwan's defense, then they would want to be in our systems to shut off the power, shut off Americans' access to gas, shut off our access to water, potentially contaminate the water. It would cause panic. And I think about those kind of attacks, those kind of strategic cyber attacks, as a psychological lever, really. China has always tolerated de facto autonomy for Taiwan. As long as they didn't declare formal independence, that shifted when Xi Jinping came into power in 2012. So we might have immense appetite to go support Taiwan tomorrow. But what appetite are we going to have when we can't get access to gas or even just working Wi-Fi? The only reason you would try to get into those systems is if you were looking to cause some sort of mayhem or destruction. This would be not just an attack on Colonial Pipeline, the largest pipeline operation in the country, but an attack on pipelines across the country, in combination with an attack on our water supply, a shutdown of the internet, a shutdown of just access to clean drinking water, all of which are attacks on civilian systems that we have never seen.
The
In the past, the experts called them the most polite hackers in cyberspace. They weren't doing anything to really hide their tracks. For the first time, we started really seeing them take great care to delete log files, to basically cover any kind of digital crumbs that they left in their wake. They're not coming from a server in China anymore. They're coming from a home router down the street. They're breaking in. Then when they're in, they're laying low. So a lot of times the forensic teams that would get called in to remediate in these attacks, they might just catch one crumb. They know they were there. But really what we saw was we were losing visibility. We were losing visibility into everything that they were in, everything that they were taking, and a lot of the infrastructure, which made it even harder to go back and catch them. If you see some weird traffic coming from a home router down the street, your first thought isn't, oh, it must be the Chinese military. But the way that they're getting into those systems involves you. It's really some of the people who would think they were the last person to be targeted by advanced nation state hackers that are getting targeted. These hackers might not be interested in you as the end target, but they're interested in your access. Even if you're a mom in Brooklyn or in Indianapolis, you are part of an ecosystem and you could be used as a conduit to hack someone else. Maybe it's a family member. Maybe it's the water utility down the street. We're seeing Chinese nation state hackers hack your home router, literally the home routers of everyday Americans, hundreds, sometimes thousands in some cases, and then they're turning them into a botnet.
One of the ways that hackers can disrupt our lives, whether it's shutting off services or using someone else's computer to hack into a system, is to take control of what's known as a botnet. A botnet is a series of compromised devices. It could be a computer, it could be your laptop, it could be your thermostat. If it's connected to the internet, it's potentially vulnerable to being taken over and then rolled up into a botnet. You're not always watching what your computer's doing. You're not always aware of what your smart thermostat is doing. You're not watching it. You're not looking at the commands that are coming into it or the activity that's going out. It's quite possible that that smart device, TV or whatever in your home has a vulnerability that you haven't patched. Those vulnerabilities are oftentimes visible to hackers down the street or around the world. There are tools that you can use, that I can use, and that bad guys can use to scan the global internet. And if they're aware of a vulnerability, they can say, find me all the vulnerable devices that are touching the public internet. And they can go straight down to that IP address. And they can go exploit that vulnerability that's maybe in your laundry room. When you're in the office and you're on your work computer, you have an enterprise-grade security bubble around you. You have a dedicated IT security team that's looking at protecting your email, that's protecting your laptop, that's protecting everything about your work experience. And then you go home. You don't have that. You don't have that chief information security officer team protecting your smart TV, your smart washer, your thermostat, your kids' devices.
They are hacking things like your home or small office router. And these are routers you buy from the internet. I get it. You don't care what brand you're getting. You just want the thing to work. You're plugging it in. Oftentimes, you're not changing the default password from Cisco to your own personal password. You're not wrapping a firewall around it. You're not turning on multi-factor authentication to make these harder targets, which means they're really easy for China or Chinese nation state hacking group to hack in and then use it as a launch pad to hack into our critical infrastructure. You can add extra protections to these devices. Most of the time, unfortunately, they're sold to you vulnerable right out of the box. I wish they would sell them to us with security built in, but they don't. So you have to change the default password to something unique. Don't just plug everything in and leave it as some gaping hole that any hacker can log into at any time.
Buy a device that has a name brand that you recognize. Don't go online and get some random name you've never heard of, because you don't know if that company is going to be around in a year or two when you need an update. The name brands have their own reputations, their own brands, their shareholders to think about. And so they have built up over the last 2 decades very robust security teams. They look at the software, they look at the devices, they make sure they're as protected as possible. And then when they become aware of a vulnerability, they push an update. So get a device, buy software that you recognize the vendor.
You have to think about every smart device in your home as a potential entry point for hackers into those systems, into your most personal life. Your baby monitor is a listening device and a surveillance device. And I have covered instances where dissidents have had their baby monitors hacked by state actors who were using them to surveil their families, their spouses, their targets. But it's also your car. Your car is now a smart device. It tracks your location. It can track your conversations. It can record sound. It can record your contacts. It can see who you're meeting with. All of these things are potential inroads for hackers. Change the default password on these devices that you plug into your home network. These things are getting hacked, not just to hack you, but to hack critical infrastructure.
Every single day, 45,000 flights take off and land in the United States, and they move 2.9 million people. Not only is it civilian traffic, it's our military air traffic as well. What would happen if the Chinese were in the Federal Aviation Administration? The ability for the Chinese to cut the FAA picture, cut communications to our pilots, means that planes would no longer be able to fly. Think about the cause and the chaos and the havoc that this would create if the FAA couldn't do their job. This points out how important it is to ensure the security of our critical infrastructure and key resources. One of the challenges of operating within cyberspace, particularly our critical infrastructure, is being able to determine, hey, is this foreign activity or is this just activity that's gone bad within our network? As we try to figure that out, as we have safety incidents within the air, think about the impact in the United States. The loss of trust and confidence in the platform that takes off and lands 45,000 times a day, moving 2.9 million personnel. This is the impact that the Chinese could have in one element of our critical infrastructure. The first means upon addressing a problem is being able to understand the problem itself. And so I begin with, do all Americans really understand the seriousness of the nature of what we're facing right now? And once they do, then it's how do we take action? I believe that most folks have no idea how at risk we are today. And if they did, I think they would demand greater action.
When you expect something bad to happen, what do? You get prepared. You protect yourself. What happens if your bank account is wiped out? Do you know where your information is? Do you know how to recover it? What do? Make sure you know where your critical information is. Make sure you know that if you lose access to a critical account, how you can get back into it, how you can go check on that next payment on your mortgage, maybe tuition. Understand how you can continue to operate even if your digital lifelines are severed. Really take your own digital identity into your hands and think about, how do I get back into that account from a different device? How do I get back into that account or into that service if I have to start from scratch? And don't think just about you. Think about your family. Think about your parents, your grandparents. Think about your kids. Just like you may have a tornado or hurricane preparedness plan, you need to have a digital disaster plan. A few key elements of that plan might include, first, cloud backups for all your accounts. Second, a password manager with the master password written down and stored in a safe place. And similarly, for your critical accounts like email, a recovery code also written down and in a safe place.
I think most Americans are very surprised that the National Security Agency does not operate within the United States. We operate outside the United States. We are a foreign intelligence organization. So what does that mean for being able to understand what adversaries are doing within our country? There's a gap and a seam that every single day, the Chinese, the Russians, the North Koreans, and Iranians often exploit. This idea of being able to operate within the United States without any element of our government being able to rapidly understand what they're doing.
The NSA is not in our home router traffic, despite some of the impressions left by the Snowden leaks. They're not actually in that domestic traffic. If they want to spy on anyone domestically, they have to go get a secret court order, they have to have a warrant, they have to have a targeted reason why the person they're spying on might be some kind of national security or terror threat, which means they're not inside the little local water utilities systems hunting for hackers on a daily basis. That is a blind spot for them. And that is a blind spot that our adversaries have determined is a unique opportunity to have leverage over the United States.
We have a free and open society. And that we don't have our law enforcement and spy services monitoring all of our cloud infrastructure, our email accounts. And the bad guys know that. The Russians, the Chinese, cyber criminals, they use our cloud infrastructure here in the US to host their attacks. They will come in from Europe or elsewhere, land in a cloud service provider here in the US, knowing that the FBI is not sitting there watching them. And that once the FBI or other law enforcement does become aware that they're in our domestic cloud services, what do they have to do? They have to go to a judge. They have to get a court order to be able to investigate that use, that illegal foreign use of the cloud service provider. But by the time they've already gone and talked to a judge, gotten the signature, the bad guys are gone. They are exploiting our constitutionally provided freedoms, our civil rights and civil liberties. They're exploiting those right now. They can't just roll up to your email provider, your online storage provider, and just start poking around. They have to establish that they have suspicion, reasonable suspicion, that something's going on. That takes time. The bad guys, again, know that that could take days to do, while the bad guys only need an hour or so to hop in and hop out.
Over 80% of the critical infrastructure and key resources are owned by the private sector. But yet this private sector is being charged with defending themselves against nation-state attackers like the Chinese and the Russians.
In 2012, there was an effort to pass bipartisan cybersecurity regulations with real teeth that would have mandated that companies meet basic, and I'm talking very basic cybersecurity requirements, like use multi-factor authentication, use good cyber hygiene. At the very time that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce was fighting back against these cybersecurity standards, this bipartisan legislation, they had actually been hacked by China. So at the very same time that they were pushing back on any kind of minimum cybersecurity standards, they had basically been owned by Chinese hackers. And we haven't seen a wholesale effort to try and raise the bar again to set these standards. So really the job of CISA is to almost beg these critical infrastructure operators to understand the threat level and to meet this bar on their own volition. A really wonderful story is the story of Ukraine in the early days of the Russian invasion, because there is this dangerous misdiagnosis that there was no cyber in Ukraine. There were actually unprecedented levels of cyber attacks launched on Ukraine in those first days of the war.
Remember, the Russians first invaded Ukraine in 2014. The Russians have been using cyber attacks for a decade or more. So the Ukrainians have been a bit of a laboratory environment where Russian hackers, Russian cyber warfare operators test their code on Ukrainian systems. The Ukrainians didn't just lie there and take it. They developed skill sets, experience, response playbooks, hardened their systems, got faster, stronger. So when 22 came around and Russia unleashed dozens of malware attacks, destructive attacks targeting the communication system, the grid, the water systems, the government critical systems, the Ukrainians knew what to do. They had the playbooks, they responded quickly.
We saw Russian hackers come for Viasat, which is essentially this internet satellite broadband provider. And it would have cut off access to Ukrainians had Starlink not come in and basically kept Ukraine online and really kept military communications online and given Ukraine a fighting chance. There was an unprecedented level of attacks on Ukrainian government agencies and also ATMs and banks. But in came Amazon and Google and Cloudflare, and they were able to mitigate those attacks. And a lot of it was due to some of the partnerships that CISA had set up with the private sector, with these private companies. And it's really critical that we maintain this trust between the private sector and the federal government so that that can continue, again, in as close to real time as possible.
That is what we have to do here in the US. That's what everyone has to do to prepare for a future of nonstop cyber warfare.
As a country, it's really time for us to stop admiring the problem and start working towards solutions. Cybersecurity is national security, and we have to adjust accordingly. You won't just be protecting yourself, you'll be protecting your community, your family, your ecosystem, your local water and power utility, because it only takes one of us to be the road of entry for any of these hacks. For years now, we've done what Mark Zuckerberg coined as Facebook's motto in its early days, which is move fast and break things, right? Get your software, get it out to market, get your application to market as quickly as you can, drive adoption. You can worry about the bugs and the mistakes later with software updates. And unfortunately, what that means is that we are rolling out buggy code at faster and faster and faster rates because of these market pressures. And all of the mistakes that we put in that code form entry points for hackers. A 0-day is just an error in the code that the software writer or hardware manufacturer doesn't know about. Now, if I'm a hacker and I can write a program to exploit that 0-day, I could potentially come up with a 0-day exploit that could read your text messages, track your physical location, record every sound you make, know your contacts, know your calendar appointments. Essentially, I could put an invisible ankle bracelet around you. There is an entire market for 0 days. There are Saudi and Emirati brokers that will pay a hacker $9 million to sell them that 0-day exploit and never tell a soul about it.
0 days are increasingly being developed by the Chinese. They've done a couple really interesting things. First is, by law, researchers in China, if they find a 0-day, they have to provide it to the security services, not the vendor, the security services. The second thing is they're creating competitions, bug bounty competitions in China to pay people to go find the most sensitive vulnerabilities in a hyperscale cloud provider. What that means is the people that provide the back-end infrastructure for your email, they want to be able to pay people to hack into those systems, find the vulnerabilities, give them to the security services so that they can then hack into the US government or other really important businesses.
Suddenly, we started seeing an unprecedented number of cyber attacks using 0 days come for us here in the United States. Many of the most serious were coming from China.
The best way to prevent malware? Ensure that your operating systems are up to date. Update that operating system every single time an update comes out. A system update provides us an ability to address known vulnerabilities. We should utilize these updates every single time because it addresses vulnerabilities that have been identified that can be used against us.
If you see an update come across for your phone, for your laptop, whatever, make sure you update as soon as possible. Companies that push updates, they don't do it because it's fun. They do it because there's a critical vulnerability that they want to address, they need to patch immediately. Update always, auto update is the best. For years and years, North Koreans have used cybercrime to steal money from banks, not just here in the US, but around the world, to transfer money into accounts, to launder it, and then bring it back home to North Korea, and then build nuclear weapons, to build research and development capabilities so that they can develop intercontinental ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads. They're expanding beyond just traditional cybercrime now, using a scheme known as remote IT workers. So they have workers in North Korea that are impersonating someone maybe living down the street from you. We are seeing online platforms used to create resumes that are then submitted via LinkedIn and other online portals. So they apply, they go through the interview. Yeah, maybe something's kind of staticky with the interview on video or on Zoom. Maybe they can't get on video, so you have to do it over the phone. Or it's an all online interview. And then they use AI, they use VPNs and proxy systems, which really just means they're making it seem as if they're operating, working out of an office building in the US. They're using AI to translate language. They're using AI for videos. And they're going through the normal application process at companies everywhere, impersonating US workers. And they're being hired and they're being paid. And sometimes these same workers are working at multiple companies. They're even targeting security companies, cybersecurity companies. And you might think, how could they be going after and be successful getting into security companies? This is where it's really important for companies, for security teams, for HR teams, and legal teams to all work together to ensure that they're aware of the latest threats and that HR, that hiring isn't just out there on their own. So it's something, again, that companies have to think deeply about as they modernize their workforce, as they modernize their business operations. And they do have to think that, hey, maybe Jim isn't who he says he is. We're in, as I see it, a transformational period when it comes to technology. You can't turn on the TV, flip open the laptop without reading something about AI, generative AI. AI is being used right now by criminals and by government actors, by security services, spies, military services. They're using it for scope, for scale. They're using it to launch more attacks, more sophisticated attacks than ever before. They're also using AI to discover vulnerabilities, never before seen vulnerabilities, at speed, quickly, across the entirety of the internet. We have to use AI for defensive purposes. This is what Silicon Valley, this is what those technological hubs, innovation centers in the United States and in the West are doing. We are using AI to harden defenses, to react faster to compromises and intrusions, faster than ever before.
Artificial intelligence provides us really two sides of a coin. First of all, the ability to use these large language models to be able to understand what our adversaries are doing in cyberspace, being able to identify their actions early. The other side of the coin, though, is this ability for hackers and other cyber adversaries to utilize these large language models to build new malware or to be able to understand their targets much better. We're seeing this every single day, this yin and yang in terms of what can we do to secure our networks, at the same time, what can hackers and others do to penetrate our networks?
But it's not just in the technical space. AI is also increasingly going to be used in the information space. Video, audio. It is harder and harder to discern what's real and what's not, what's AI generated and what's actually us walking around. And this is where it's going to be increasingly important for the social media platforms to be able to provide some sort of indicator of what's real and what's AI generated. When I came into government, my second time around in 2017, I had modest expectations of what my responsibility and role was going to be. I don't think I fully understood how important the election security mission that CISA had inherited was and was going to be. As it happened, CISA was entrusted with significant responsibility working with state and local officials, working with other partners in the federal government, working with some international allies as well. There was a meeting where the team is together and we're working through a bunch of different scenarios on how bad guys can attack elections. And it was that moment that we realized at CISA how important our jobs were. One of the most eye-opening events in the last decade was the 2016 election. This was an entire new class of threats, of risks to our public institutions. To democracy itself is under attack. They used 3 different techniques. The first was they tried to hack into election systems. Elections in the United States are run at the state level. So we have 50 plus different election systems in the US. And the Russians were trying to wind their way into a number of them. Fortunately, that distributed nature and then the redundancies built in, including paper ballots that allow us to go back and count and recount the outcome of an election, built in resilience to the system. The Russians didn't know that. They were just knocking around trying to figure out what they could do. The second technique they used was developing personas in social media and then finding wedge issues that divide us as Americans. And this is not exclusive to the United States. The Russians are very active in Europe and elsewhere. They've gone after elections in countless European countries. The Chinese intelligence services are also using social media in these wedge issues to advance their own causes and undermine those that could be adversarial to them. So they'll build up these persona. They'll start peppering their messaging and their propaganda. And again, it's just to influence us. It's to cause us and lead us to believe something that they want us to believe. And then the third was that they would hack into political campaigns, political parties, look for sensitive information, look for sensitive emails. If 2016 was anything, it was writing and publishing the playbook that other countries could use in subsequent elections. In the 2020 election, we saw the Iranians try to hack into various state voter registration systems. We saw them push online propaganda campaigns to try to intimidate voters. In the 24 election, we saw the Chinese hack into political campaigns. We saw Iranians hack into political campaigns. Every cycle, a new actor tries to get involved. And again, it's not just about technical attacks. What they're really looking to do, it's up here. Trying to hack our brains. They're trying to lead us to believe something that they want. Sometimes that's a preferred candidate. Other times, in my view, is it's just trying to get us to doubt the system. This is something that everyone should be concerned about. This is something that everyone should be prepared in future elections for more interference.
One of the challenges that we think artificial intelligence is going to pose to us in the future is the ability for anyone to create deep fakes, to be able to sway a portion of the voting population of the United States, or being able to impact what we think about an issue is one of the things that many of our adversaries are trying to do.
In the 24 election, Russian disinformation groups associated with the Russian military released a number of AI-generated videos and audio trying to lead us to believe that certain things were happening, that illegal immigrants were coming in to the state of Georgia, registering to vote and then voting multiple times. That's just one example of likely over 100 attempts by the Russians to influence our elections. Fortunately, the leadership of the state of Georgia immediately called it out by working with the private sector, with threat intelligence companies that have eyes on these different disinformation groups. The FBI quickly followed and confirmed, said, yeah, it's the Russians. We know bad actors, whether they're foreign or domestic, are going to use AI for whatever their purposes are. But then we have a skeptical public that says, wait a second, is that real? The candidate can say, no, that's not real. And then they can go investigate. So we have to be mindful. We have to be discerning in the content, the information that we consume online, and not fall to our baser instincts, our immediate reactions like, oh, that one hits me right in the heartstrings. If the content that you're consuming really emotionally at a base level resonates with you, think about it for a second. Why? Who might be trying to influence me? Who might be trying to get me angry, mad at my neighbor, mad at that political candidate? Think about it. And then go confirm, is this real? Is this video real? Is that audio real? And it's even beyond that. They were using AI in the 24 election to generate articles, made up content about candidates, about political parties. Again, think about what's being served to you. Go verify the content. Just like when you were in school and writing a paper, you tend to want to get more than one primary source for a claim. We tend to think here about cyber as a purely technical discipline, as an issue of hacking and stealing money and stealing intellectual property. Our adversaries, on the other hand, they think about how to use the technical piece to create effects in the psychological space. What does that really mean? They want you to be afraid. They're digital terrorists. They want to hack things. They want to make things stop working so that we all panic, so that we're in the streets protesting. In the early teens, the North Koreans hacked into Sony because they were upset about a movie, The Interview.
These North Korean hackers essentially pulled off what's called a wiper attack, where they got into Sony's systems and they just decimated data because they were upset about a movie that was about to come out with Seth Rogen that depicted the assassination of their dear leader. So they froze up 70% of Sony's servers, and then they took the added step of selectively leaking out Sony executives' emails to embarrass them. There's always been this line of Don't say anything in an email or a chat that you wouldn't want read on the front page of the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. The Sony attack really made that a reality. It is entirely possible that your throwaway line in your email or the joke in your chat is going to end up in some hack and leak that is then picked up and publicized by every major media outlet in the country. And those leaks actually eventually led to the firing of some of their executives. The way I really think of the North Korean hack on Sony is it really was this hack on our First Amendment, right? Our ability to put out any movie, say anything we want, even if it's offensive to Kim Jong-un. And Kim Jong-un did not like this movie, and so they came for Sony Pictures. We really treated this as a joke because it was a comedy, but it gets very serious when you think about the fact that there was a long tail to this hack, that maybe another motion picture studio would be timid about producing any kind of other content that would be offensive to North Korea's leaders or to Russia or to China. We are starting to see this almost creeping level of self-censorship here, not just from these hacks, but certainly the hacks were a major boost.
As we harden our systems against these attacks, we also have to harden our mindsets. We have to become more resilient technically and psychologically to digital attacks. And I know it's hard. I know there's so much information flowing around and it seems chaos day in, day out. But these are the moments when we do have to kind of really reflect on what it means to live in a democracy, to live in a community, and not overreact and not fall prey or victim to digital authoritarianism.
If cybersecurity were purely a technology problem, we would have solved it 20 years ago with firewalls, with antivirus. The reason we didn't solve it is because we never took the human factor into account.
We talk a lot about how cyber criminals are trying to hack into accounts and things like that, but there are also scammers out there that are directly interacting with you, sending you text messages, sending you emails, trying to get you to turn over information, trying to develop relationships with you, friendships, sometimes more intimate relationships, trying to get you to send them money, to send them intimate pictures. There are countless people on the face of the earth that want to get your information, that want to get your money. How do they do it? They send you an email pretending to be your bank, pretending to be your account at school or at work. And what do they want you to do? They want you to give them information that allows them to log into your account. They want your credentials. They want your login and they want your password. Those two things together could allow them to log into your accounts, your bank, for instance, and transfer money out. That is a phishing attack. Don't be so forgiving of typos or that they may spell a word with the British spelling, adds the U in there. These are all telltale signs that it may be a phishing email. Take that extra step. Use a little skepticism and it will save you from a lot of pain. There is an increase of criminal scammer gangs overseas that are developing relationships with teenagers, developing these trusted relationships where kids are sending sensitive, intimate pictures, and then it turns around and these scammers are blackmailing children. our parents, our grandparents. And whether they're comfortable with digital devices or not, doesn't matter, they're still being targeted. You see it time and time again. People online are being exploited for money, for blackmail. We have to have these conversations to protect people from being exploited online. So you really have to be mindful of who you're interacting with online, who you're sharing information with, who are you sending images, videos to. This is increasingly important for parents as their children are getting their first devices, their first phones, their first social media accounts. Just have open conversations about social media use, about text messages, and that you shouldn't send money to someone you only know because of a text message relationship or a direct message chat or a messenger chat. You wouldn't just hand over money randomly to someone you just met, would you? Same thing applies here. When you talk to your children about social media, make sure that there are very explicit rules, very explicit understandings about how they're supposed to use this, and that they're not sharing pictures of themselves, that they're not sending text messages with images and videos. Be mindful and aware of all these accounts you have, of all the information you're sharing. We're seeing an increase of these trusted relationships being exploited by scammers.
All it takes is 15 seconds of your voice to convert you into a deepfake. So don't use your voice on your voicemail. If you get a call from an unknown number, don't talk into the phone. Don't pick up an unknown number. But if you do pick it up, wait for them to start talking to figure out whether it's a legitimate person on the other end of the phone. Because these days, hackers and scam artists are calling just so they can get that 15-second snippet to turn your voice into a deepfake. Have a code word with your family members so that if you are deepfaked, if someone calls you pretending to be your parent or your kid in distress, you can say, what's the code word? And if they don't have it, then you might be talking to a deepfake, and you certainly shouldn't wire money to whoever's asking you for money. So have a code word. My favorite story was actually an oil and gas company that had done a pretty good job hardening their systems. So they had firewalls, they had multi-factor authentication, they had intrusion detection systems. And so hackers were having a hard time getting in. So what they did was they started researching the employees at this company on LinkedIn. And then they went to their social media profiles, and they saw that several of the employees at this company had liked the same Chinese takeout restaurant. And so what did they do? They compromised the Chinese takeout restaurant's PDF takeout menu so that when these people went to go order lunch or whatever Chinese takeout, they were actually downloading Chinese malware instead.
A useful exercise for anyone to do is take stock of your online footprint. What social media apps you're using and accounts you have. And it's not always just about, the lifestyle things like Instagram or TikTok or whatever, but there's also LinkedIn. There are professional profiles. There are other sorts of accounts that you've put out there. There's even maybe if you have a personal blog where you talk about the trip you took with your family and friends and all that. There could be a corporate webpage where information about you is posted. Keep in mind that while you may be posting or publishing discrete pieces of information one at a time, that can all be aggregated with something you posted 3 weeks ago, that your kid posted a month ago. And that can all get rolled up into a more comprehensive profile of you that could allow a bad actor, a criminal, a fraudster to open an account in your name. And they've got everything. They've got your address. They've got your phone number. They've got your email address. Because you, over the course of a period of time, posted all of that stuff. Yes, our digital profiles are ever expanding, but you have the ability to take control of your online presence and your online identity. Lock it down. Keep your devices updated. Know where your information is.
When we think about being able to communicate with each other, one of the most important things is to understand, is this conversation encrypted? This idea that what we're saying actually is being secured by algorithms or formulas that prevent the normal adversary from being able to intercept it or listen to it. So if you're using the simple, text, the Chinese can read that. You say, well, it's not that important that someone else can read it. Well, think about what you text, right? And so, yes, I think that when I look at being able to both talk and text, I want a platform that's encrypted.
Limit how much access these systems have to your life. You can turn off the location access in most of the apps you use on your phone. You don't need to give location access to every app you've downloaded from the App Store. You can add extra protections to these devices.
Take a hard look at what information those apps collect, how they use it, how they protect it, how they share it. Don't just turn your information over to anyone because you want to play some game about birds and candy. You really want to streamline and minimize your online exposure. Use a browser that has privacy protections and that trades itself as a privacy browser. Just like you've always worried about pickpockets when you travel, you also need to be thinking about your digital security when you travel. A few things to keep in mind when you're abroad. First, travel lightly. Don't bring a bunch of devices that you leave in your room. Have your phone with you at all times. Second, use digital payments like Apple Pay, Click to Pay, not Tap to Pay. Turn off your Wi-Fi and Bluetooth Auto Connect to make sure that you're choosing the networks that you interact with. Use a privacy screen, particularly on transportation, so people aren't looking over your shoulder and seeing what you're working on. And lastly, when you cross borders, turn off your devices because you might lose access to that device for a little bit of time and you don't know who's getting into it. There's a term in the security business, threat modeling. Developing a threat model. You can do a similar exercise. Before you can really protect yourself, you have to understand what you're protecting, what your risks are, what your vulnerabilities are. You have to take a 360 view of who you are, what you are, how you operate, and build your digital defenses around those attributes. And odds are you already do a little bit of this anyway in your day-to-day life.
It's asking yourself, who am I a target of? Is it just identity thieves? Is it a ransomware actor? Is it a company that I work with might make me a target for a nation state attack? Or is my company, my utility, a target for a nation state hacker? Is it my personal data? Am I a government employee? Are they looking for my fingerprints? If I'm a journalist, is it my sources? So you have to ask yourself, who's after me? And then you really have to adjust your behavior accordingly. It's called hardening your attack surface, but then it's also about limiting the blast radius. Unfortunately, perfect security is a pipe dream. The name of the game is making sure that if they do get in, it's minimal impact. I worry a lot about cyber threats in my day-to-day life. I have watched Chinese advanced nation-state hackers come for my colleagues. I've had postcards sent to my house from Russia's Foreign Intelligence Agency. I've had people offering $250,000 to anyone on the dark web who could get them into my phone or my email address. And I've received threats on social media, like many of you. So I think a lot about how to make myself a much harder target. So for me, it's asking myself, who's after me? And then what are they after? And how do I wrap as much protection and redundancy around that thing that they might be after, so that if they get into my email or they get into a smart device in my home, they're not going to necessarily get to my crown jewels. What I usually tell people is you start by asking yourself one simple question, which is, what is my one thing? What is the one thing that if it were taken, if it were degraded, if it were held hostage in a ransomware attack, it would be devastating? You're not going to be able to protect everything, but you can protect your one thing. So your answer to this one thing is going to be very different if you're asking as an individual or as a professional. As an individual, the answer to my one thing question might be my baby photos of my kids or a letter from my father before he passed away. As a journalist, the answer to my one thing question was very different. It was my sources, right? If someone could get access to who my sources were, to our communications, it might be game over for that source, or it might be game over for me as a journalist because no one would trust me with their communications. Or if I had to go to jail to protect that source, that would also be game over for me. So as a journalist, for sources that were really sensitive, I would never communicate with them digitally. We actually set up a regular cadence where we would meet the same day at the beginning of every quarter at the same place, and I wasn't allowed to bring my devices. I wasn't allowed to drive there in my car, which is now a smart device, a smart listening device. I wouldn't take an Uber because that tracks your location, and that location data can be mapped over my source's location data and used to connect us. I would just show up on this regular cadence and have a conversation with pen and paper. And I would even go as far as to make my notes totally illegible, and I would never put their name down on those notes. And that level of paranoia is ridiculous for every other aspect of my life. But that was my one thing. I do all the basics. I use a password manager for most things. But then for something really sensitive like my email or my Apple Cloud account, I'll come up with my own long, very complicated passphrase. I always recommend that people use a phrase or a song lyric, and you replace the I's with ones, or you replace the T's with a pound sign. You come up with your own system, but for really sensitive accounts where it would be game over if they were compromised, you come up with a unique, really hard password, and you make sure you're using multi-factor authentication. And if you want extra credit in this masterclass, you'll go out there and you'll buy yourself a YubiKey, which is a physical form of authentication that you touch every time that you want to log into your account.
Increasingly, much of our home is connected to the internet. Balance, obviously, is being able to ensure the security of what you're doing versus the convenience of being able to utilize these things. This is a delicate balance, and being able to ensure that you understand both the vulnerabilities, but also understand the convenience is one of the things that has to be balanced by every individual. I'm not a Luddite and say you can't ever use these things. I mean, I got these things in my house as well. You know what I mean? I got an alarm system, right? That's hooked up to the internet, a security system that tells me when there's, a fire in the house. I'm sure I've got my computer, it tells me when the printer is out, when the printer ink is out. What I normally say is, hey, just understand that, this is a means upon which, it increases the convenience of what you do, but it also has the capability to have a pretty intrusive presence, whether or not it's hearing what you're saying or whether or not it's a camera in your house. These are things that just have to be considered by each individual.
It can seem overwhelming, and it can seem like, why isn't someone else doing this for me? I don't really have time in the day to go lock this thing down or that thing down. But increasingly, our digital lives, we have to think about them just like our everyday normal lives. We take care of ourselves. You should. You clean up your house. You should. You lock your doors. You lock your car doors. This is just one more responsibility that comes along with being an adult in the modern times, really. So what we have to be thinking is, how do we protect ourselves? How do we protect our families? Everything is interconnected. Everything now has a digital dependency to it. We have to lock our lives down.
Anticipate that one day you're going to make a mistake, because at the end of the day, we're all human. And make sure that you have redundancies in place. So make sure that if your iCloud photo account was to get hacked and hijacked with ransomware, you've printed out the photos you would never want to lose. You have backed them up into a hard drive that you keep offline and back them up on a regular basis, so it's not game over. If you do all of these things, if you are using a password manager, if you're using long, complicated passphrases for your most critical accounts, if you're running your software updates, if you're using multi-factor authentication, if you're not clicking on links from strangers, if you're not picking up the phone and allowing yourself to be deepfaked, you are going to be better off than 99.999% of the population. Rising to this challenge, meeting this threat, addressing this threat can feel impossible. But the reality is that solving it comes back to these very basic things that you have heard 100 times about what we call cyber hygiene. And what I want you, the everyday person, to understand is that you have more power than you think.
Regardless of what your security posture is and the decisions you make, you have to prepare for a bad day, because there may be things that happen that are outside of your control. It's not hopeless.